So hey anime fans. The series name is What If Naruto Were the Red Flash of Konoha? So let's start the series. The Scarlet Streak. The chain of the swing groaned a low, metallic protest with every half-hearted pump of his legs. Naruto Uzumaki was 12, and the world smelled of damp earth, pine needles, and the distant, tantalizing ghost of Ichiraku's pork broth. It was a smell that usually promised comfort, but tonight it just felt like salt in a wound he couldn't quite name. It wasn't the usual, sharp hatred that rolled off the villagers in visible waves. That, at least, was a fire he knew how to fight with louder shouts, brighter pranks, a wider, more desperate grin. No, this was different. It was in the way the old lady at the vegetable stall wouldn't meet his eyes, her gaze sliding over his shoulder as if he were a smudge on a window. It was in the hurried cross to the other side of the street, not with a sneer, but with a shiver, a muttered prayer to some forgotten god. Their looks held a cold, superstitious dread. They weren't afraid of the demon fox inside him. In this life, there was no nine-tails chakra boiling under his skin. They were afraid of him. Of the boy who sometimes, in flashes of rage or spikes of fear, seemed to blur. To leave a faint, after-image of crimson light in his wake, like the dying ember of a sparkler. Stupid, he muttered to the empty training ground, his voice swallowed by the twilight. His stomach grumbled, a hollow echo in the quiet. Should have bought 2 extra bowls. Stupid old man Hokage and his fiscal responsibility lectures. He kicked a pebble. It wasn't a hard kick, just a petulant flick of his ankle. But the stone didn't just roll. It shot across the clearing like a bullet from a slingshot, tearing a furrow in the dirt before striking a wooden training post 30 feet away with a sharp, definitive crack. Splinters erupted from the point of impact. Naruto froze, his breath catching. He stared at his sandaled foot. Had he done that? The air around his toes shimmered faintly, like heat haze over a summer road, and for a second, he thought he saw a wisp of something red, not orange, not like his jacket, but a deep, arterial crimson curl and vanish. A cold trickle, unrelated to the evening chill, traced a path down his spine. He'd seen that haze before. In reflections he'd thought were tricks of the light. In the moment last week when Mizuki had cornered him, kunai drawn, and Naruto's panic had made the whole world seem to stretch and slow before Mizuki was suddenly, inexplicably, sprawled 10 feet away with a dazed look. Naruto had blamed a slippery patch of moss. The groaning of the swing's chain was the only sound. No, that wasn't right. It was the only sound. The ever-present chorus of cicadas in the trees had ceased. Not faded. Ceased. As if a switch had been flipped. The absence of noise was a physical pressure against his eardrums. Then the smell hit him. It cut through the pine and earth, vile and impossible to ignore. Ozone, the sharp, clean scent after a lightning strike, but corrupted, mixed with the cloying sweetness of rotting fruit and beneath it, the dry, mineral smell of old bones in a deep cave. It was a smell that didn't belong in the living world. Naruto's heart, a frantic bird trapped in his ribcage, began to hammer. His palms were instantly slick with sweat. Every instinct, every primal cell in his body, shrieked a single, deafening command, run. He turned his head, the movement painfully slow. It stood by the memorial stone. It hadn't walked there. It was simply present. A figure shaped like a man, but all its proportions were a subtle, gut-churning wrong. Its legs were too long, its arms hanging past its knees, ending in slender, twig-like fingers with too many joints. It was naked, its skin the color and texture of a week-old corpse pulled from a river, a grayish-white, mottled with blues and purples. It had no face. No eyes, no nose. Just a smooth, blank oval of flesh, bisected by a single, vertical gash that was stitched shut with coarse, black thread. The stitches were messy, violent, as if the mouth had been sewn closed in a hurry. The thing stood perfectly still. But Naruto could feel it looking at him. The focus was a physical weight, a cold spot centered on his chest. His lungs burned. He hadn't taken a breath since the smell began. He sucked in air, and it was icy, laced with that death stench. His thoughts fragmented into white noise. Not real nightmare genjutsu bad ramen. The stitched mouth on the faceless thing twitched. Then, slowly, the black threads began to unravel. They didn't break, they slithered out of the gray flesh like worms, dropping to the ground with soft, wet plops. The gash opened. There was no tongue, no teeth. Just darkness. A depth that shouldn't have been possible in something that stood 7 feet tall. And from that darkness, a sound emerged. Not a voice. It was the sound of a large stone being dragged over gravel, of a tree groaning as it fell, of a dozen people whispering different words all at once from the bottom of a well. It formed a single, hideous sentence that vibrated in Naruto's bones, not his ears. We see the spark. We will have the motion. Terror, pure and undiluted, liquefied Naruto's muscles. This wasn't a missing nin. This wasn't some academy test. This was wrongness made flesh. And it wanted him. His mind, screaming, finally latched onto the one command his body understood. Run. The word wasn't a thought. It was a key. It turned in a lock he never knew he had. Deep within him, in a place far older than chakra coils or spiritual energy, something ruptured. It was not the joyous, boundless surge of the Ninetales. This was violence. It was the feeling of every blood vessel in his body suddenly flooding with molten lead. It was the sound of 1,000 windows shattering inside his skull. A crimson light, not the soft orange of sunset but the fierce, blinding red of a forge, erupted from his pores. The world didn't slow. It stopped. The last falling leaf from the oak tree hung in the air, a perfect, motionless silhouette against the violet sky. A drip from a broken gutter pipe was a quivering, silver jewel, frozen in its descent. The particles of dust kicked up by his own fear were suspended in a silent, golden cloud. And Naruto was on fire. Not burning, but ignited. His consciousness was a frantic spark riding a tsunami of sheer, impossible velocity. He didn't decide to move. The concept of moving was too small. He rejected his current location. He pushed. Crack boom. The sound was not an echo. It was the birth cry of a vacuum. It was the air itself being torn in half, unable to fill the space he vacated fast enough. The training ground vanished in a strobe flash of seared retinas. Heat. Blinding, unbearable heat on his skin, his face. A pressure like a mountain sitting on his chest. The world was a violent, streaking blur of meaningless color and light. He had no sense of up or down, only a terrifying, exhilarating sense of away. Then, as suddenly as it began, it ceased. The crushing pressure vanished. The roar of wind was replaced by a high-pitched, deafening whine in his ears. The world snapped back into focus with a nauseating lurch. Naruto was on his hands and knees, gravel digging into his palms. He was panting in ragged, shuddering gasps, each breath scraping his throat raw. He blinked, tears streaming from his eyes to clear the sting of wind and heat. He was on a flat, rough-hewn surface. He looked up. Stone. The stern, weathered brow of the fourth Hokage gazed out serenely over the village. He was on top of the Hokage monument. He had crossed half the village in the space between one heartbeat and the next. A wave of vertigo slammed into him and he dry-heaved, nothing coming up but bile and terror. The smell was different here, cleaner, colder, high-altitude air, but undercut by a sharp, acrid tang. He looked down at himself. Smoke. Thin tendrils of gray smoke were curling from his jacket, from his pants. The edges of his orange tracksuit were blackened and crisped, as if held near a flame. His sandals were nearly melted, the straps fused to blistered, angry red skin. His hair, when he touched it, was brittle and hot. And below, he forced himself to look down, over the cliff edge. A thin line of destruction scarred the face of Konoha. It started at the training ground, a perfect circle of blackened, glassy earth where his swing had been. From there, a straight, scorched trench tore through a line of trees, now snapped and burning, clipped the corner of a storage building, roof tiles vaporized, and ended in a smoldering, zigzag pattern up the cliff face to where he now knelt. It looked like the path of a meteorite, or the claw mark of some gigantic, burning beast. The faceless thing was gone from the training ground. Or it was hiding. A new kind of cold seeped into him, deeper than the night air. What had he done? What was he? Well. The voice came from behind him, calm, familiar, but stripped of all its usual lazy amusement. It was a blade being quietly drawn from its sheath. Naruto twisted, crying out as the movement pulled at scorched skin. Kakashi Hatake stood there, not 5 feet away. He hadn't landed with a dramatic thud, he was just present, as still as the monument itself. His Hitayate was up, the Sharingan eye a bloody, spinning comma in the dusk. That eye was fixed on Naruto, wide and unblinking. Kakashi's single visible gray eye was narrowed, not in judgment, but in a kind of professional, horrified assessment. His hands were loose at his sides, but Naruto saw the tension in his forearms, the readiness in his stance. For the first time, Naruto saw Kakashi not as a bored sensei, but as a veteran killer who had just witnessed something he couldn't classify. That, Kakashi said slowly, his voice measured, is a new one. Naruto tried to speak. His voice was a sandpaper rasp. Kakashi-sensei. There was this thing. I saw it, Kakashi interrupted, his gaze never leaving Naruto. Or rather, I saw where it wasn't. I felt the chakra disruption. A null signature. Like a hole in the world. He took a single, careful step forward. What I did not see, until it was already over, was you moving. One moment, your chakra flared a flare like nothing I've ever sensed, all heat and violence, no pattern, and the next, there was a sonic boom and a fire trail leading up here. He crouched down, now at eye level with the trembling boy. You outran my Sharingan, Naruto. Do you understand what that means? Naruto could only shake his head, mute with shock and pain. It means, Kakashi said softly, you just rewrote the book on shinobi speed. And you nearly cooked yourself alive doing it. He reached out, not to touch, but to examine the smoking fabric of Naruto's sleeve. Can you stand? Naruto tried. His legs were water. They buckled immediately, muscles screaming in protest, a deep, aching burn saturating every fiber. He collapsed back onto the stone with a groan. Kakashi didn't sigh. He didn't make a joke. He simply nodded, as if confirming a grim theory. In one smooth motion, he slid an arm under Naruto's shoulders and lifted him with effortless strength. The movement was gentle, but Naruto still whimpered as his scorched clothes rubbed against raw skin. "Hold on," Kakashi said. "The Hokage needs to see this. And you need to tell us exactly what happened. From the beginning." He paused, looking from Naruto's blistered feet to the still smoking trench that scarred the village below. "And we need to figure out what, in all the hells, you just awakened." As Kakashi leapt from the monument, cradling him, Naruto looked over his sensei's shoulder. Down in the darkening training ground, near the memorial stone, he saw a single, quick flicker of movement. A pale, long-fingered hand, waving goodbye. Or beckoning. Then it was gone. Naruto buried his face in Kakashi's flak jacket, the smell of old leather and metal a temporary anchor against the void of his fear. He wasn't just a prankster. He wasn't just an outcast. He was a spark that had started a fire. A red, screaming, impossibly fast fire. A name whispered in the back of his shattered mind, born from the villagers' dread, the Hokage's secretive looks, and now, this living nightmare, the Red Flash. The title didn't feel heroic. It felt like a diagnosis. And as the agony in his body truly began to register, throbbing in time with his frantic heart, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. His life, for better or worse, would never, ever be slow again. Next. Chapter 2, The Ghost in the Veins. The journey to the Hokage Tower was a blur of vertigo and pain, a nauseating slideshow of upside-down rooftops and the rhythmic, stomach-lurching thuds of Kakashi's landings. Naruto wasn't a passenger, he was cargo, a fragile, smoldering package. Each impact sent fresh jolts of agony through his legs. The wind whipped his scorched hair, carrying the sharp, urban smells of cooking fires, lamp oil, and the ever-present underlying scent of damp stone and moss from Konoha's foundations. It was a familiar tapestry of smells, but tonight it was laced with something new, the acrid, metallic odor of his own burnt skin. They didn't enter through the grand front doors. Kakashi veered around the back, a shadow among shadows, and slipped through a third-floor window that opened silently to his touch. The room beyond was a small, nondescript antechamber, plain walls, a single scroll rack, smelling of dust and old paper. A hidden panel in the wall slid aside at a pulse of Kakashi's chakra, revealing a narrow, dimly lit staircase leading down. The air grew cooler, damper. The stone here was older, the mortar between the blocks crumbling slightly. This was the administrative underbelly of the village, a place of secrets and secure rooms. Naruto had never been here. He'd only ever seen the Hokage's sunlit office, the place of scoldings and reluctant ramen coupons. Kakashi finally stopped before a heavy oak door banded with iron. He didn't knock. He placed his palm flat against the wood, and a complex seal, invisible to the normal eye, glowed a soft blue under his hand before fading. The door swung inwards without a sound. The room beyond was a stark contrast to the bureaucratic sterility outside. It was a cross between a medical bay and an archive. Shelves lined one wall, stuffed not with mission scrolls, but with ancient, leather-bound tomes, their spines cracked and titles faded into illegibility. The other wall held cabinets with glass fronts, displaying an array of bizarre artifacts, twisted pieces of metal that hummed faintly, crystals that pulsed with a sickly inner light, preserved biological samples in jars that Naruto decided not to look at too closely. The center of the room was dominated by a large, scarred wooden table, and beside it, a hospital gurney that had been wheeled in. And there, standing by the table under the glow of a single, bright overhead light, was the third Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi. But this was not the kindly, tired grandfather figure. His pipe was absent. His robes were the simple, dark attire of a field commander. His face was etched with deep lines of concern, his eyes sharp and assessing as they locked onto Naruto. Beside him, a man Naruto recognized with a jolt, Ibiki Marino, the terrifying proctor of the Chunin exams, his massive arms crossed over his scarred chest, his gaze impassive but missing nothing. "Set him here," Kakashi, Hiruzen said, his voice gravelly and devoid of its usual warmth. He gestured to the gurney. Kakashi laid Naruto down with surprising care. The thin mattress felt like heaven against his screaming muscles. A moment later, another figure emerged from the shadows in the corner, a medic neen with a severe bun and wireframe glasses. She didn't speak, just began her work with clinical efficiency. Her hands, glowing with green chakra, hovered over his legs. The cool, soothing sensation of the medical ninjutsu was an immediate relief, dialing the searing pain down to a deep, throbbing ache. She peeled away the melted remains of his sandals with careful precision. Second-degree burns on the soles and lower calves, she stated tonelessly. Severe muscular microtears throughout the lower body. Ligament strain. Minor capillary rupture in the eyes and under the skin of the face. Signs of acute oxygen deprivation. His system is flooded with stress hormones and an unknown metabolic byproduct. It reads like a toxin, but it's energetic. She looked up at the Hokage. It's as if he ran 100 marathons in the span of a second. His body tried to keep up and failed catastrophically. Hiruzen's jaw tightened. He turned his gaze from Naruto's blistered feet to his face. Report, Kakashi. Kakashi stood at ease, but every line of him was alert. I was monitoring the northern training ground perimeter as part of the standard evening rotation. At 1947, I registered a catastrophic chakra anomaly, a spike of pure, unstructured energy with a thermal signature off the charts. Concurrently, I detected a secondary signature, a null field, a perfect chakra vacuum. It felt anti-natural. Before I could close the distance, the thermal signature vanished from its origin point and reappeared approximately 1.2 kilometers away, atop the monument. A sonic detonation and a visible trail of superheated air and combustion occurred along the vector between the 2 points. The null signature vanished. Subject Naruto was found at the terminus point in a state of severe physical distress and shock. Ibiki grunted. A null field. Faceless ones? The description fits the old scrolls, Hiruzen murmured, his eyes distant. Consumers of chakra and identity. They haven't been seen since the purge of the Blood Marsh during the Second War. He leaned over Naruto. Naruto. Look at me. Naruto forced his eyes open. The medic's chakra was making him drowsy, but the Hokage's voice commanded focus. Tell me what you saw. In your own words. Leave nothing out. The words came out in a halting, rasping flood. The silence. The smell. The thing by the stone, its impossible limbs, its sewn-shut mouth, the sound of its voice that wasn't a voice. The terror. The feeling of something breaking inside him. The world freezing. The fire in his blood. The journey. He described it not as movement, but as a violent rejection of space itself. When he finished, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the overhead light. Hiruzen and Ibiki exchanged a long, heavy look. The crimson chakra, Ibiki stated, as if pronouncing a sentence. Hiruzen nodded slowly, a profound sadness in his old eyes. He pulled a wooden stool over and sat beside the gurney, the action making him look suddenly very tired, very human. He reached out and placed a weathered hand on Naruto's unscorched forearm. The touch was warm, grounding. Naruto, he began, his voice low. What you experienced, it is a genetic legacy. A mutation, rare and dangerous, that surfaces in certain bloodlines. It was documented in the Warring States era, before the founding of the villages. They called it the ghost in the veins, or more commonly, the crimson chakra. It is not a tailed beast. It is not a demon. It is a flaw in the soul's connection to the physical world. A propensity for motion so profound it bypasses normal chakra pathways and draws directly on the body's own essence, its very life force, as fuel. Naruto stared, trying to process. Life force? You mean, like I'm burning myself up? Yes, Hiruzen said, his grip tightening slightly. Precisely. The red energy is a visual manifestation of that catastrophic conversion. Speed that shatters sound, that bends physics, but at a cost measured in your own cells, your own lifespan. The faster you go, the hotter you burn, the more you consume. The shinobi who manifested it in the past, they were legendary. They could end battles before they began. But they died young. Their bodies gave out, crumbling to ash from the inside, or they made a single, final, glorious sprint that left nothing behind but a fading scarlet streak and a crater. The horror of it seeped into Naruto, colder than any fear of the faceless thing. This wasn't a power. It was a suicide button wired into his DNA. Why me? He whispered, his voice cracking. We do not know, Hiruzen admitted. Your mother, Kushina, had a fierce, fiery spirit, but no such ability. Your father, Minato, he paused, and a flicker of something, pride, profound grief, crossed his face. Minato's speed was a thing of genius, of sealwork and intellect. The flying thunder god is a technique of incredible finesse. What you have is the opposite. It is pure, unrefined violence. A primal scream given form as velocity. We had hoped, given it hadn't manifested by now, that you had been spared. The thing, the null thing, Naruto said, desperation clawing at him. It said it wanted the spark. It wanted the motion. Ibiki stepped forward, his bulk blocking the light. The faceless ones are drawn to extreme chakra phenomena. They are scavengers of power, identity, and memory. Your awakening was a bonfire in the spirit world. It called to it. It will have tasted your energy signature. It will be curious. He said it with the detached air of a scientist discussing a specimen. It, or others like it, may return. So what do I do? Naruto's voice rose, edged with panic. Do I just not use it? Lock it away? Kakashi spoke from the doorway, his tone dry. Ignoring a limb-severing technique doesn't stop the blade from cutting, Naruto. You can't unbreak the seal. The potential is awake. Fear, anger, desperation, any extreme emotion could trigger it again. Only next time, without any control, you might not just burn your feet off. You might liquefy your own heart. The medic finished her work, applying a pungent, green salve to his burns and wrapping them in clean, white bandages. The pain was now a distant, muffled throb. The immediate physical crisis was over. The existential one was just beginning. Hiruzen stood up, his back straight, the Hokage once more. Here is what will happen. You will remain here tonight for observation. Tomorrow, your training with Team 7 will begin, but it will have a new primary objective, control. Kakashi will be your lead instructor. We will also consult with Mike Guy on extreme physical conditioning regimens to fortify your body. We will research every fragment of lore on the Crimson Chakra. And you, Naruto, will learn. You will learn control, or you will die. That is your first and greatest mission. He moved to the door, then paused, looking back. The grandfatherly warmth returned for a fleeting second. This does not make you a monster, Naruto. It makes you a shinobi of Konoha with a unique and heavy burden. How you carry it will define you far more than the power itself. He and Ibiki left, the heavy door ceiling shut behind them with a final sounding thud. Kakashi lingered. He walked to the shelf of ancient books, ran a finger along a crumbling spine. The red flash, he said, almost to himself. That's what they call the last known user. A mercenary from the land of Earth. He could run across a battlefield faster than an arrow's flight. He killed 17 enemy shinobi in the time it took to draw a single breath. He turned to Naruto. He was 24 when his legs turned to brittle charcoal during a sprint. He spent the last 2 years of his life blind and bedridden, his body slowly consuming itself. Naruto lay in the sterile light, the bandages tight around his feet, the ghost of burning blood still humming in his veins. The fear was still there, a cold stone in his gut. But beneath it, something else was stirring, a stubborn, defiant ember. He was an outcast, an orphan, a container for a village's fear. Now he was a genetic time bomb. The world had always been against him. He looked at his hands, resting on the coarse blanket. They were just hands. A little scraped, dirty under the nails. They didn't look like they could tear the sky in half. Red Flash, he thought. The name didn't feel like a death sentence anymore. It felt like a challenge. A terrifying, probably fatal, challenge. He looked at Kakashi. Sensei? How do I start? A faint, almost invisible smirk touched the corner of Kakashi's visible eye. It wasn't a happy expression. It was the look of a man who saw a long, painful road ahead, but respected the fool who chose to walk it. First, Kakashi said, you learn to stand. Then, you learn to walk. And we pray to every god that's listening that you never, ever have to run. Outside, in the deep night of Konoha, a shadow moved where no shadow should have been, clinging to the stone wall of the tower like a malignant beetle. The stitched seam on its blank face twitched, tasting the residual, scorched energy in the air. It was a delicious, potent flavor. The spark is bright, it whispered into the void only its kind could hear. The motion has begun. We will watch. We will wait. The feast is promised. It dissolved into a pool of ink-black darkness and was gone. High above, in his official office, Hiruzen Sarutobi stood at the window, looking out over his sleeping village. He held a single, yellowed page in his hand, a fragment from a warring state's diary. The words, faded but stark, seemed to burn in the moonlight. The red flash is not a technique to be learned, but a curse to be endured. It offers the power of a god and the lifespan of a match. Treat its bearer not as a weapon, but as a dying star, beautiful, devastating, and tragically brief. He closed his eyes, the weight of the hat heavier than ever before. Minato, he whispered to the silent night. Kushina. What have I done? What must I now ask of your son? The night offered no answer, only the distant, lonely cry of an owl, and the creeping, unspeakable cold seeping up from the forgotten places beneath the village. Next. Chapter 3, The Burden of Blazing. The sterile room beneath the Hokage Tower didn't have windows, so Naruto marked the dawn by the changing of the guard outside his door and the arrival of a breakfast tray. The food was bland plain rice, boiled fish, steamed vegetables, but he devoured it, his body a furnace demanding fuel. The medic Nin returned, her fingers glowing green as she probed his legs again. Remarkable, she muttered, more to herself than to him. Her glasses glinted under the light. The cellular regeneration is accelerated. The burns are healing at 3 times the normal rate. The micro-tears have begun to knit. It's as if the trauma triggered a hypermetabolic state. She looked at him, her clinical detachment momentarily pierced by scientific curiosity. Your body is trying to adapt to the stress. Compensating. Naruto didn't feel remarkable. He felt like a puppet with its strings cut, aching in places he didn't know he had. But the deep, fiery agony was gone, replaced by a pervasive, bone-deep soreness. When the medic finally pronounced him fit for light, non-impact activity, he almost wept with relief. The door opened, and Kakashi stepped in, a clean, folded set of clothes in his hands, standard issue navy blue shorts and a black t-shirt. Get dressed, he said, his voice back to its usual casual monotone, but his eye missed nothing, scanning Naruto's bandaged feet and pale face. We're meeting the others at Training Ground 7. Try not to set anything on fire this time. Training Ground 7 was a secluded, wooded area with a wide, grassy clearing and a gently flowing stream. The air here was fresh, smelling of damp moss, sun-warmed pine, and the rich, dark scent of earth. It was a peaceful contrast to the chemical and panic smells of the previous night. Sasuke Uchiha was already there, leaning against a tree, his posture the very picture of brooding impatience. He glanced at Naruto as he limped into the clearing behind Kakashi, and a flicker of something, not concern, but sharp, analytical interest, passed through his dark eyes before his usual mask of cool disdain slid back into place. Sakura Haruno stood near the stream, twisting a strand of pink hair around her finger. Her expression was a complex map of worry, confusion, and a dawning, horrified fascination. The village gossip mill had already been churning, whispers of a red explosion and Hokage intervention had reached everyone's ears by breakfast. Good, you're all here, Kakashi said, clapping his hands together once. The sound was unnervingly loud in the quiet glade. We have a slight, curriculum adjustment. Naruto has manifested a unique chakra affinity. For his safety and the safety of everyone within a quarter-mile radius, our primary focus will be on his control. Sasuke straightened up. Unique affinity? What does that mean? It means, Kakashi said, his eye curving into a smile that didn't reach the rest of his face, that our beloved teammate is a walking, talking tactical hazard. Yesterday, he vaporized a line of 30-year-old pine trees and gave himself second-degree burns because he got scared. Imagine what he could do if he got really annoyed. Sakura paled. Vaporized? Naruto, are you okay? The question was automatic, her medical kunai instincts overriding her fear. Naruto shuffled his bandaged feet, heat rising to his cheeks that had nothing to do with his chakra. I'm fine, Sakura-chan. Just a little, crispy. Your concern is touching, Kakashi drawled, but save it. Naruto. Center of the clearing. Now. You two, on the log over there. Observe. Do not interfere. Sasuke's jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in his cheek. Being told to sit and watch was an insult to his pride. But he obeyed, moving to the indicated fallen log with a controlled, angry grace. Sakura followed, perching on the edge, her hands clenched in her lap. Naruto hobbled to the center of the sun-dappled grass. The morning dew soaked through his bandages, a cool shock against his healing skin. All right, Kakashi said, standing 10 feet away. The fundamental principle of chakra control is the balance between spiritual and physical energy. Your condition bypasses that. It's a brute force conversion of raw life force into kinetic energy. There is no finesse. So, we start from a place of no finesse. I want you to close your eyes. Naruto did, the world narrowing to the sound of the stream, the rustle of leaves, and the smell of his own nervous sweat. Feel your heartbeat, Kakashi instructed, his voice a low, steady rhythm. Feel the blood moving in your veins. The air in your lungs. The weight of your body on the earth. That is your baseline. That is stillness. Your enemy is not an opponent. Your enemy is your own adrenaline, your own panic. The moment your heart rate spikes, the moment your breath hitches, the ghost in your veins wakes up. Your first lesson is to know your own fear. To feel its edges before it consumes you. For a long minute, Naruto just stood there, trying to calm the frantic rabbit pulse in his chest. It was hard. The memory of the faceless thing, the sound of tearing air, the smell of his own burning flesh, they all lurked just behind his eyelids. Good, Kakashi said, though Naruto felt anything but good. Now, I want you to recall the feeling. The moment just before you moved. Don't trigger it. Just examine the memory. Like poking a sleeping bear with a very, very long stick. Naruto gritted his teeth. He revisited the terror. The icy dread. The moment of rupture. He felt a corresponding twitch deep in his core, a phantom heat that flared and vanished. A tiny, almost invisible puff of red steam hissed from the pores on his forearm. On the log, Sakura gasped. Sasuke leaned forward, his Sharingan unconsciously activating for a split second, a single tomo spinning in his left eye before he shut it down, a frown of intense concentration on his face. Interesting, Kakashi murmured. It's responsive to memory. To emotional echo. Now, stabilize. Push the memory away. Focus on the stream. Count the burbles. Naruto tried, sweat beading on his forehead. The phantom heat retreated, but it left a residue, a thrumming potential in his muscles, like a plucked bowstring. This is pathetic, Sasuke's voice cut through the concentration. We're supposed to sit here while he learns not to wet himself at his own shadow? What about real training? Kakashi didn't even turn. Understanding one's own weapon is the most real training there is, Sasuke. A sword you cannot sheath will eventually cut your own hand off. Or in this case, ignite you from the inside out. His tone shifted, becoming lighter, deadlier. But if you're bored, we can move to practical demonstration. Naruto. Open your eyes. Naruto did. The world seemed sharper, colors slightly oversaturated. I am going to throw a kunai at Sakura, Kakashi stated calmly, as if announcing the weather. What? Sakura squeaked, scrambling back on the log. Your objective, Kakashi continued, pulling a single kunai from his pouch, is to stop it. But you are not to move from that spot. You are not to trigger your speed. You will stop it using only your chakra control. Form a shield. Deflect it with a puff of air. I don't care how. But if you use the red flash, the exercise is a failure, and you will spend the rest of the day copying the Konoha Shinobi Code of Conduct from memory. This was impossible. Naruto had the chakra control of a drunk badger. He could make 1,000 shadow clones through sheer, stubborn volume, but a subtle chakra shield? He'd never done it. Ready? Kakashi didn't wait for an answer. His arm blurred. The kunai wasn't thrown with killing intent, but it was fast and true, spinning end over end straight for Sakura's shoulder. Panic, pure and bright, lanced through Naruto. Sakura! His heart slammed against his ribs. The world didn't freeze, but it slowed. He saw the sun glint on the rotating blade, saw the terror widen Sakura's green eyes. The heat erupted in his gut, a sunburst demanding release. His legs coiled, tendons screaming to unleash hell. No! He didn't fight the fear. He rode it. He let the panic wash over him, but he grabbed the instinct to move and strangled it. Instead, he flung his hands out, not to push his body, but to push his chakra. He didn't try for finesse. He imagined a wall. A big, stupid, thick wall of pure energy right in front of Sakura. He didn't mold it. He vomited it. A gout of visible, chaotic red chakra, not the streamlined fire of his speed, but a wild, sparking plume shot from his palms. It wasn't a shield. It was a wave. It hit the kunai not with precision, but with overwhelming, clumsy force. The weapon didn't deflect, it disintegrated in midair, melted into a blob of molten metal that splattered on the grass with a hiss, setting a small patch on fire. The red chakra wave continued, dissipating harmlessly a foot in front of a utterly stunned, wide-eyed Sakura, leaving the smell of ozone and hot copper in the air. Silence. Naruto stood, panting, his hands smoking slightly. He hadn't moved his feet. The bandages were intact. The triumph was immediate and dizzying. I did it. I didn't run, he yelled, a grin splitting his face. Kakashi walked over to the smoldering grass and stamped out the tiny flame. You melted a 30 Ryo kunai into slag and nearly set your teammate's hair on fire with a chakra belt that had the control of a volcanic eruption, he said flatly. But you didn't trigger the primary event. You localized the reaction. That's a start. He sounded almost impressed, in a deeply concerned way. Your chakra, when not used for velocity, is wildly destructive and unstable. But it is your chakra. Not the ghost's. Remember that distinction. Sasuke was on his feet now. The dismissive scorn was gone, replaced by a cold, competitive fire. He had seen the raw, destructive power in that clumsy blast. It was wasteful, stupidly potent, and unlike anything in the Uchiha repertoire. Let me spar with him, he said, his voice tight. Not a chance, Kakashi said. He's a live landmine in a china shop. You'd provoke him, he'd explode, and I'd be explaining to the Hokage why there's a new, Uchiha-shaped canyon in the Land of Fire. He turned to Naruto. Again. This time, I want you to try and catch a leaf. From the air. As it falls. Using only a whisper of that chakra to guide it to your hand. No flames. No melting. The exercise was torture. It required a delicacy Naruto's very soul seemed to rebel against. Hours passed. Leaves were incinerated, turned to confetti, or blasted into the next county. Sakura eventually left her perch and started offering hesitant, intelligent suggestions about chakra shaping from her academic studies, her fear momentarily overshadowed by her analytical mind. Sasuke watched, simmering, occasionally performing the exercise flawlessly himself with a smug, effortless grace that made Naruto want to scream. By midday, Naruto was drenched in sweat, his bandages soaked through with dew and perspiration. His head ached from the concentration. But finally, as a yellow birch leaf spiraled down, he managed to extend a hand and coat his palm with the thinnest, most tremulous film of red energy. It wasn't a shield or a wave, it was a faint, shimmering haze. The leaf touched it, stuck for a moment, and then fluttered gently into his waiting hand, perfectly intact. He held it up, the simple leaf feeling heavier than any trophy. He looked at Sakura, who gave him a small, genuine smile. He looked at Sasuke, who met his gaze and gave a single, slow, acknowledging nod. It wasn't friendship. It was a warrior seeing a new variable on the battlefield. Kakashi clapped once. Enough. We'll call that a victory. Dismissed. Naruto, with me. We're paying a visit to the blue beast of Konoha. Your body needs to become a fortress, or the next time you sneeze too hard, you'll launch yourself into orbit. As they left the training ground, Naruto felt exhausted, sore, and his feet throbbed. But the cold stone of fear in his gut had shrunk. It was still there, but now it had company, a single, stubborn, smoldering coal of determination. He had controlled it. Just a little. Just for a second. It was enough. For now, it was enough. High in the branches of a tree at the edge of the training ground, a patch of shadow deepened, wrung against the dappled sunlight. The blank, stitched face observed the departing team. It had watched the chaotic red energy, the struggle for control. It found the boys' efforts quaint. Like a moth trying to harness the heart of a forest fire. The spark struggles against its nature, it whispered into the void. It seeks a cage of flesh and will. How fragile. How delicious. The burning will come. And we will be there, to savor the ashes of his restraint. It faded into nothingness, leaving only the faint, lingering scent of ozone and a deep, abiding cold that made the nearby ants abandon their trail. Next. Chapter 4, The Fortress and the Flame. The walk to Might Guy's usual training grounds was a pilgrimage of pain for Naruto. Each step sent a fresh, dull ache from his soles up through his spine. The clean, medicinal smell of the salve on his burns battled with the ripe, organic scent of his own sweat. Konoha was alive around them, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the shout of a fishmonger, the yeasty smell of baking bread, but it all felt distant, muffled under the throbbing in his feet and the whirlwind in his head. Kakashi moved with his usual languid grace, but his single visible eye kept darting to Naruto's limping form. Guy's methods are enthusiastic, he warned, his voice a dry monotone. He believes the body's limits are lies told by a weak spirit. For you, that philosophy is a literal truth. Your spirit, this crimson chakra, will shatter your body if it's not strong enough to contain it. Guy is going to try and build you a container of iron. They found Guy, as expected, in the midst of a truly apocalyptic training regimen. He and his pupil, Rock Lee, were in a grassy clearing cratered from past exertions. Lee, his bowl-cut hair plastered to his forehead with sweat, was holding a one-armed handstand on the tip of a kunai, his other arm behind his back, his legs slowly scissoring in a punishing rhythm. Guy stood nearby, a stopwatch in one hand, a megaphone in the other, roaring encouragement. 1043. The flames of youth burn brighter than the dawn, Lee. I can feel the heat from here. YOSH. Thank you, Guy-sensei. Lee bellowed back, his voice cracking with strain but unwavering in conviction. The air smelled of crushed grass, sweat, and the faint, clean scent of liniment. It was a temple of self-imposed suffering. Guy spotted them and snapped the stopwatch closed with a dramatic click. He pivoted, his green spandex suit a blinding shock of color against the green foliage, and thrust a thumbs up so forceful it seemed to create a minor breeze. Kakashi. My eternal rival. And you have brought the youthful new sapling I was told to expect. Welcome to the path of springtime vigor. Naruto flinched, both from the volume and the sheer, unadulterated intensity. Lee dropped from his kunai, landing lightly and bowing deeply, his dark eyes wide with curiosity as they fixed on Naruto's bandaged feet. Kakashi gave a weary half-wave. Guy. This is Naruto Uzumaki. His condition requires a specialized physical foundation. One that can withstand internal conflagration. Guy's smile didn't waver, but his eyes sharpened, the boisterousness dialing down into something more serious, more analytical. He strode forward, moving with a predator's smoothness that belied his loud appearance. He crouched in front of Naruto, his gaze scanning him from head to toe. The Hokage briefed me. The Crimson Legacy. A power that consumes the vessel. He reached out and, with surprising gentleness, tapped Naruto's sternum. Here, yes? A furnace in the heart, connected to strings of fire in every muscle. Naruto nodded, stunned by the instant, accurate assessment. It burns, Guy-sensei. When it comes out. Of course it burns. Guy boomed, standing up. It is the flame of life itself, forced to burn 1,000 times brighter. To contain such a flame, you cannot have a vessel of paper or clay. You must forge yourself into steel. Not just strong steel, but resilient steel. Steel that can glow red-hot and not warp. Steel that can be quenched in the coldest water and ring true. He turned to Lee. Lee. What is the first principle of building an indomitable body? Lee snapped to attention. Consistency and effort, Guy-sensei. Passion and persistence. Correct. And the second? To understand one's own limits. So you may kick them in the face and march past. Guy nodded, his expression grave. Naruto. Your limits are not where your muscles fail. Your limits are where your bones would shatter, where your sinews would snap under the force of your own spirit. We must find that line. And then we must move it. Every single day. The training that followed made Kakashi's control exercises look like a relaxing nap. It was not about speed or technique. It was about pure, unadulterated load-bearing. Guy started with isometric holds. Naruto was made to hold a low horse stance, his thighs parallel to the ground, while Guy and Lee piled smooth river stones onto his shoulders. The weight started small, but increased steadily. The burn in his quadriceps was immediate, a deep, trembling fire. He was to hold the position, breathing steadily, for 10 minutes. Sweat poured down his face, dripping from his nose and chin onto the dirt, which turned dark and pungent. He could smell the wet earth, his own salty sweat, and the clean, mineral scent of the stones. Your body is learning to be still under pressure. Guy called, circling him. The crimson chakra is pressure from within. If you cannot be still under external weight, you will never contain the internal inferno. After what felt like an eternity, the stones were removed. Naruto's legs shook so badly he nearly collapsed. But there was no rest. Next came resistance training of a brutal simplicity. Lee, under Guy's direction, used thick, elastic bands made of woven chakrabeast tendon, slick with oil and smelling strongly of animal musk, to provide opposition as Naruto performed slow, agonizingly controlled squats, pushes, and pulls. The focus was on the eccentric movement, the lowering, the yielding, teaching his muscles to absorb force, not just generate it. Explosive power you have in abundance. Guy explained, his voice a constant, motivating drumbeat. But a cannon that is not anchored to bedrock will blow itself over. We are building your bedrock. The afternoon sun climbed, beating down on them. Naruto's world narrowed to the scream of his muscles, the rasp of his breath, the taste of copper in his mouth, and Guy's relentless, uplifting commentary. Lee worked alongside him, a silent, determined example, his own movements flawless and full of a graceful power Naruto envied. During a water break, gulping down tepid water from a canteen that tasted of metal and canvas, Naruto saw Kakashi and Guy speaking in low tones a short distance away. The damage is cellular, Guy, Kakashi was saying, his voice low. It's not just strain. It's like radiation sickness. Every burst accelerates his aging, degrades his telomeres. Guy nodded, his usual exuberance gone, replaced by a profound solemnity. Then we must make his cells tougher than any shinobi's have ever been. We must flood his body with so much vitality, so much life force from training and nutrition, that the decay is outpaced by regeneration. It is a race, Kakashi. A race within his very flesh. Kakashi's eye slid to Naruto. Can it be done? Guy flashed a thumbs up, but it was a grim gesture. For the sake of his youth, we must believe it can. The alternative is unthinkable. The final exercise of the day was the worst, and the most revealing. Guy had him stand, arms extended, while Lee, at Guy's signal, began to throw small, soft cloth balls at him from varying angles. Naruto's task was not to dodge. It was to tense the specific muscle group that would be hit, just before impact, and absorb the blow without moving his feet. Thwack! A ball hit his shoulder. He'd been late, flinching away. Guy sked thwack. His thigh. He tensed, but too hard, locking the joint and staggering thwack. His solar plexus. He saw it coming, remembered the furnace in his chest, and for a terrified second felt the red energy stir, attracted by the perceived threat to his core. He choked it down, forced a hard, rigid clench of his abdominals. The ball hit and bounced off. He'd moved back an inch, but he hadn't ignited. Good. Guy roared. You contained the surge. You used the body, not the ghost. Exhausted, filthy, and feeling like one giant bruise, Naruto finally collapsed onto the cool grass as Guy called an end. The sky was turning peach and violet. Lee bowed to him deeply. Your determination is most youthful, Naruto-kun. I look forward to training with you again. As Kakashi helped a groaning Naruto to his feet, Guy placed a heavy, warm hand on his shoulder. You have a fierce flame, Naruto. Do not be its victim. Become its master. Become the forge that contains it. We will meet again at dawn tomorrow. Rest. Eat protein. And dream of steel. The walk back through the darkening streets was silent. Naruto's body felt both shattered and strangely alive, humming with a new kind of awareness. He could feel every fiber, every tendon, as if they'd been individually tested and mapped. He's right, you know, Kakashi said quietly, as they approached the familiar, lonely apartment building. It's a race. And you're running it on two fronts, control of the mind, and fortification of the body. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, Team 7 has its first official C-rank mission. A simple escort to the land of waves. No combat expected. It will be a good test of your focus in a low-stakes field environment. A mission. A real, out-of-the-village mission. A spark of excitement cut through the fatigue. This was what he'd wanted. To be a real shinobi. But as he lay in bed hours later, his body a constellation of aches, sleep wouldn't come. The memory of training was replaced by the older, colder memory. The faceless thing. The null field. He stared at the ceiling, the familiar water stain looking suddenly like a stitched-up mouth. He got up, wincing, and shuffled to the small, cracked mirror above his sink. In the pale moonlight filtering through the window, his reflection was gaunt, eyes shadowed. He stared into his own blue eyes. And for a fraction of a second, the reflection didn't move with him. It lingered, just a hair too long. And in the depths of the mirror pupils, he didn't see his own face reflected back. He saw a void. A smooth, gray oval. He blinked, hard. His reflection was just his reflection. Pale, tired, scared. He stumbled back to bed, pulling the covers over his head, trying to block out the moonlight. The mission, the training, the forge of his body, it all felt suddenly fragile. The enemy wasn't just inside him. It was outside, too. Watching. Waiting in mirrors and memories. And it was hungry for the spark he was now desperately trying to cage and steal. Next. Chapter 5, The Bridge of Whispers. The morning of the mission dawned with a crisp, metallic clarity that promised nothing but routine. Naruto's body screamed in protest as he forced himself out of bed, every muscle a knotted rope of complaint from Guy's training. He dressed in a fresh, loose-fitting orange tracksuit, his bandaged feet stuffed into a new, sturdy pair of sandals. The lingering scent of medicinal salve clung to him, a sharp note under the smell of cheap soap. Team 7 assembled at the main gate. Kakashi was late, of course, reading his little orange book with studious indifference. Sasuke stood with his hands in his pockets, looking bored, but his dark eyes flickered with a barely contained intensity. The prospect of leaving the village, of testing himself, was a palpable hum around him. Sakura had packed a sensible, oversized backpack and was nervously adjusting her forehead protector. Their client was a man named Tazuna, a wiry, older bridge builder with a perpetually sour expression, a strong smell of cheap sake and sawdust clinging to his clothes, and eyes that darted around with a fear that didn't match a simple construction job. He looked at the team of genin and one apparently disinterested jonin and scoffed. This is it? Konoha's famous protection? A clown, a girl, a brooding kid, and a man who reads porn in public? Great. Just great. Naruto swelled up immediately. Who you callin' a clown, you old geezer? I'll have you know he caught Kakashi's warning glance and the phantom heat in his core gave a dangerous flutter. He deflated, grinding his teeth. Control. Steal. Forge. He repeated Guy's mantras in his head. The Hokage has assured us it's a simple C rank, Kakashi said, not looking up from his book. No combat. Just escort. Let's move out. The journey began through the lush, vibrant forests of the Land of Fire. The air was thick with the scent of blooming wildflowers, rich loam, and the clean, green smell of a million leaves. Birdsong and insect chirps created a peaceful symphony. For the first few hours, it was almost enjoyable. Naruto's aches faded into the rhythm of the walk. He pointed out weird-shaped clouds, tried to get Sakura to laugh with terrible jokes, and ignored Sasuke's stoic silence. Tazuna, however, grew increasingly nervous the further they got from Konoha. He jumped at every snapped twig, his eyes scanning the dense undergrowth. The fierce smell on him, acrid sweat under the sake, grew stronger. It was on a narrow, shaded path winding along a steep ravine that the atmosphere changed. The birds fell silent. The only sound was the rush of a river far below and the crunch of their footsteps on gravel. A thick, ground-hugging mist began to coil around their ankles, cold and clammy. It carried a new smell, not forest decay, but a wet, rotten sweetness, like flowers left to drown in a stagnant pond. Kakashi snapped his book shut. Get down. The attack was a blur of sound and violence. Two massive, serrated chains, gleaming with a sickly purple chakra, shot from the mist on either side of the path. They didn't aim for the shinobi. They converged on Tazuna with terrifying speed and precision. Before Naruto's brain could even register threat, his body reacted. The fear for the old man, for the mission, for the sudden shattering of the peaceful walk, spiked like a needle. The red heat in his gut surged, a sun flaring to life. The world began to crawl, the chains becoming slow, spinning lines of malevolent light. No! The training screamed in his head. Don't unleash it. Contain. He didn't try to move. He threw himself sideways, a normal, panic dive, shoving Tazuna to the ground. The chains whistled over their heads, missing by inches, and smashed together in a shower of sparks and a deafening clang that echoed through the ravine. Kakashi was already moving. In a puff of smoke, two clones appeared, each grabbing a chain and yanking. From the mist, two hulking figures were pulled into view. They were not normal men. They wore matching gray uniforms and featureless porcelain masks, but their bodies were wrong. Their proportions were subtly off, their movements jerky, as if their joints were poorly oiled. Demonic chain users. Missing Nin. But something about their silent coordination, their utter lack of vocalization, felt eerily familiar. Sasuke exploded into action, a flurry of shuriken forcing one back. Sakura positioned herself over the cowering Tazuna, kunai drawn, her face pale but determined. Naruto scrambled to his feet, his heart hammering. The red energy was banked, but it simmered, a pot ready to boil over. He saw one of the chain wielders break from Sasuke's assault, its masked head turning with unnatural smoothness towards Tazuna again. Its arm drew back, chain coiling like a metallic serpent. The fear was back, but this time, Naruto seized it. He didn't let it trigger the ignition. He used it as fuel for focus. He formed the Ram Seal. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Not 1, not 10, but 24 shadow clones poofed into existence around the attacker in a chaotic swarm. It was a classic, brute force Naruto tactic. But it worked. The chain user was momentarily overwhelmed, lashing out at the clones, which popped in clouds of smoke. Kakashi dispatched the other with brutal efficiency, a lightning-enhanced kunai strike severing the chain at its source before a follow-up kick shattered its mask and the skull beneath. The body fell, twitching, but as it did, the porcelain mask fragments dissolved into black smoke, and the body itself seemed to deflate, collapsing into a pile of wet, gray rags and a smell of burnt hair and ozone. The one surrounded by Naruto's clones met a similar fate under a combined assault from Sasuke's fireball and Kakashi's finishing blow. Silence returned, heavier than before. The mist began to dissipate. Not a simple C rank, I take it, Kakashi said, wiping his kunai clean. He looked at Tazuna, his eye flat and hard. Demonic Chain Brothers. A rank missing Nin. They don't take bridge escort contracts. Who wants you dead, Tazuna? The old man broke down, sobbing into his hands, the smell of fear now tinged with despair. He confessed everything. The bridge in the Land of Waves was a direct threat to the economic stranglehold of a local shipping magnate, Gato, a man with ties to corrupt officials and, apparently, missing Nin. The mission was a suicide run. Sasuke was furious, vibrating with anger at the deception. Sakura looked terrified. Naruto just felt a cold lump in his stomach. This was real. People had just tried to kill them. And he'd almost lost control. He looked at his hands. They were trembling, but not from the red flash. From the aftermath of ordinary, mortal fear. We are now well outside the parameters of your mission, Kakashi stated. As team leader, I can abort. We return to Konoha. No. The word ripped from Naruto's throat before he could think. Everyone stared at him. He looked at Tazuna, a broken old man trying to build something for his people. He thought of the villagers of Wave, trapped under Gato's thumb. He thought of what it meant to be a shinobi of Konoha, not just a weapon, but a promise. The Hokage's words echoed, how you carry your burden will define you. We can't just leave them, Naruto said, his voice gaining strength. We're already here. We're shinobi. This is what we're supposed to do. He wasn't just talking about the mission. He was talking about the fire in his veins. He had to learn to use it, to control it, for something. Or the fear would always win. Sasuke snorted, but after a moment, he gave a curt nod. Running from a fight because the client lied is pathetic. The enemy is stronger than expected. Good. It's better training. Sakura, though still pale, took a deep breath. If Naruto and Sasuke are staying, I am too. We're a team. Kakashi looked at them for a long moment, his eye crinkling into a real, if tired, smile. Well then. Mission parameters updated. Protect Tazuna, complete the bridge, eliminate the Gato threat. Effectively, an A rank. Welcome to the big leagues, kids. Stay sharp. The next attack won't be so straightforward. As they helped a shaken, grateful Tazuna to his feet and continued towards the coast, the atmosphere had changed. The forest no longer felt peaceful. Every shadow was a potential chain, every rustle a masked assassin. The adventure had turned deadly serious. And Naruto, walking point beside Kakashi, felt the ghost in his veins not as a terrifying curse, but as a heavy, dangerous tool. He'd contained it once in real combat. He could do it again. He had to. Because ahead, through the trees, he could begin to smell salt on the air, and beneath it, the deeper, colder scent of poverty, fear, and the rottenwood stench of a bridge half-built, waiting for its builder and for the blood that might be required to finish it. They were walking into a trap. And for the first time, Naruto Uzumaki, the red flash of Konoha, wasn't just running from something. He was choosing to walk towards the fire. Next. Chapter 6, The Town That Drowned. The Land of Waves wasn't a land at all, it was a funeral. A vast, sprawling archipelago of mist-shrouded islands, skeletal piers, and houses built on stilts that seemed to sag under a permanent weight of sorrow. The air, once they crossed the final bridge from the mainland, changed utterly. The rich, earthy scents of the forest of fire were replaced by a damp, all-consuming brine, undercut by the stench of dead fish, rotting seaweed, and the sweet, cloying decay of untreated sewage. It was a smell that didn't just fill the nose, it coated the tongue and clung to the skin, cold and clammy. The village Tazuna called home was a ghost town painted in shades of gray and despair. Ramshackle houses huddled together for warmth they'd never find. Faces, gaunt and hollow-eyed, peered from behind cracked shutters, their expressions not of curiosity, but of a numb, animal fear. The only vibrant colors were the garish, peeling posters of Gato, a pinched-faced man with glasses and a cruel smile advertising his protection services and toll rates. They were plastered over every other wall, a visual poison. Tazuna's own home was a slightly sturdier version of the poverty around it. It was filled with the warm, familiar smells of wood shavings, drying clay, and a simmering fish stew, but these homely scents were fragile islands in the sea of misery outside. His daughter, Tsunami, was a woman whose beauty was worn thin by worry, and his grandson, Inari, was a small, silent boy whose eyes held a flat, dead look that was far too old for his face. The boy flinched at Naruto's loud voice and stared at Sasuke's brooding intensity as if they were just newer, stranger monsters. That first night, over a tense, quiet meal, the story came out in broken pieces. Inari's father, Kaiza, a fisherman with a smile as wide as the sea, had been the town's hope. He'd stood up to Gato's thugs, inspired the people to start Tazuna's bridge, a symbol they called the Bridge of Courage that would connect them to the mainland and break Gato's monopoly. In response, Gato's men had tied Kaiza to a post at low tide and made the entire village watch as the cold, grey water slowly, inexorably rose to his chin, then his mouth, then his nose. They made them watch as he struggled, as he finally stilled. The message was absolute: hope drowns here. Inari hadn't spoken a full sentence since. He believed heroes were fairy tales that got good men killed. Naruto listened, the stew turning to ash in his mouth. He looked at the small, broken boy and saw himself. Not the details, but the shape of the loneliness, the conviction that the world was a dark, uncaring place. The anger that began to boil in him wasn't the wild, panicked heat of the crimson chakra. It was a slower, deeper, more dangerous burn, a forge fire of pure, righteous fury. He made a promise, not to Inari, but to the ghost of Kaiza, to the shrouded town outside. He would finish this bridge. He would break Gato. The next week was a study in contrasts. Days were spent on the half-finished bridge, a massive, skeletal structure of damp timber and cold iron that stretched out into the endless, choppy gray water. The sound of hammers and saws was a defiant rhythm against the constant sigh of the wind and the cry of gulls. The air up on the bridge was cleaner, sharp with salt and the tang of fresh-cut pine. Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura acted as guards, perched on high beams, scanning the misty horizon for threats. Naruto's control was tested not by combat, but by boredom and immersion. He practiced his leaf-catching exercise with seagull feathers in the stiff ocean breeze. He sat in meditation, focusing on the crash of the waves, trying to make his inner rhythm match their powerful, relentless pulse, neither too frantic nor too still. The vast, open horizon was a good counterpoint to the claustrophobic fear the red flash invoked. Evenings were spent at Tazuna's house, a fragile domesticity. Sakura helped Tsunami with chores, her medical knowledge useful for the village's many untreated ailments. Sasuke trained relentlessly in a nearby clearing, his Sharingan flaming to life again and again as he practiced new fire techniques, the smell of ozone and burnt grass cutting through the salt air. And Naruto tried to talk to Inari. It was a disaster of awkward silences, failed attempts at levity, and the boy's utter, contemptuous dismissal. Naruto showed him tricks, told him ramen-fueled stories of Konoha, even made a clumsy bird out of a bridge blueprint scrap. Inari would just stare, then turn and walk away, his small shoulders hunched. "Give it up, dead last," Sasuke said one evening, wiping sweat from his brow. "The kid's broken. Not everyone can be blasted with your obnoxious optimism." "Shut up, team." Naruto shot back, the familiar insult to comfort. "He's not broken. He's buried. I know what that's like." Sasuke gave him a long, measuring look, but said nothing more. The real training, however, came from Kakashi. With the immediate threat established, he began advanced team drills. They practiced formations to protect a stationary target, Tazuna on the bridge, communication in high wind conditions, and identifying ambush points in the unique, misty, waterlogged terrain. It was during one of these drills, 3 days after their arrival, that the horror returned. They were practicing signal recognition on a deserted, rocky beach at dusk. Kakashi had hidden several bells with distinct chakra signatures among the tide pools and sea stacks. Naruto was searching, his senses stretched, his boots crunching on wet gravel and slippery kelp. He rounded a tall, barnacle-encrusted rock. And the world went silent. The crash of the waves vanished. The cry of the gulls was snuffed out. The smell of salt and decay was overwritten by that familiar, gut-churning cocktail, ozone, rotting fruit, and old bones. His heart seized. No. Not here. He was not alone in the tide pool. Kneeling in the shallow, icy water, its back to him, was a long-limbed, gray-skinned figure. It was hunched over something. Not a faceless one, but one of Gato's chain-wielders. Or what was left of him. The masked body lay limp, and the creature was feeding. Its head was bent, the vertical stitched seam on its face open wide, a black maw. A thin, phosphorescent stream of blue-white energy, the dead man's chakra, his very life essence, was being siphoned from the corpse into that void. As Naruto watched, frozen in terror, the corpse didn't just die, it eroded. The skin grayed further, flaked to dust. The muscles withered. The porcelain mask cracked and fell away, revealing a face that was becoming indistinct, blurry, as if the memory of it was being sucked away along with the chakra. Consumers of chakra and identity. Ibiki's words echoed in the awful silence. The creature finished. The corpse was now a desiccated, featureless husk, barely recognizable as human. It straightened up, its joints popping with wet, cracking sounds. It began to turn. Naruto's fight or flight screamed. The red sun in his gut roared to life, threatening to eclipse him. Run! Burn a path through the sky. But he saw the faint, glimmering bell of Kakashi's chakra signature, tucked behind a rock just past the creature. He saw the larger mission: protect the bridge, protect the town. If he fled in a blaze of scarlet, he'd lead this thing right back to Tazuna's doorstep. He'd reveal his greatest, most dangerous card. Control. Steal. Forge. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He did the hardest thing he'd ever done. He closed down. He imagined Guy's stones on his shoulders. He imagined the thick tendon bands pulling him back. He forced his breathing to slow, his racing heart to quiet. He let the terror flow through him, acknowledged it, but refused to let it touch the sun in his core. He became still. Not just physically. He made his chakra go quiet, dim, insignificant. He made himself, in that moment, unappetizing. A pebble. A piece of driftwood. The creature completed its turn. Its blank face regarded him. The stitched seam quivered. It took one gliding step towards him through the water. Naruto held his breath. He didn't look at its face. He looked past it, at the distant, mist-shrouded outline of the bridge, focusing on that symbol of defiance. The creature paused. Its head tilted. It seemed to sniff the air. The voracious hunger he'd felt a moment ago seemed to wane, replaced by confusion. The vibrant, terrifying spark it had sensed was gone, hidden behind a shell of willpower. After an eternity of 3 seconds, it made a soft, wet, clicking sound deep in its throat, and then dissolved. Not into mist, but into a puddle of inky, black shadow that seeped into the wet gravel and vanished. The sounds of the world rushed back, the waves, the wind, the gulls, with deafening force. Naruto slumped against the rock, trembling violently, cold seawater soaking his pants. He hadn't used the red flash. He had won by not using it. He found the bell with numb fingers and stumbled back to the rendezvous point. He didn't tell Kakashi what he'd seen. Not yet. The horror was his to carry for now. But he knew 2 things with crystalline clarity. The faceless ones were here, in wave, drawn by the violence and fear. And they were feeding. And he, Uzumaki Naruto, had just faced one down and survived by being more than just a spark. He had been a wall. A silent, unyielding fortress. He looked out at the Bridge of Courage, a dark spine against the twilight sky. They were building more than a span of wood and iron. They were building a pyre for Gado's tyranny. And he would be the flame that lit it, but a flame in a lantern, controlled, directed, not a wildfire. He had to be. For Inari. For Kaiza. For the town that drowned every single day. The forge of his will had just been tempered in the coldest, darkest water imaginable. And it had held. Next. Chapter 7, Demon of the Mist. The sea mist in the land of waves wasn't weather, it was a living, breathing entity. It curled into the bones, seeped into clothes until the fabric grew heavy and damp, and carried with it the whispers of the dead. In the days following Naruto's silent encounter on the beach, the mist seemed to thicken, turning the world into a monochrome dreamscape of grays and muffled sounds. The routine of bridge guarding became a tense vigil, every shift in the fog a potential blade. Naruto kept his secret. The memory of the faceless one draining the chain wielder was a cold stone in his stomach, but sharing it felt like admitting a vulnerability they couldn't afford. He focused on the training, on the steady, rhythmic construction of the bridge, on the stubborn, silent war with Inari's despair. The boy had taken to watching them from the shoreline, a small, dark silhouette against the bleached-out sea and sky. The attack came on a morning so thick with fog that the sun was just a pale, watery smear overhead. The sounds of construction, the thwack of hammers, the screech of saws, were swallowed by the damp air. Tazuna was high on the central span, directing the placement of a main support beam. Naruto was perched on a crossbeam 20 feet away, trying to peel a soggy orange. Sakura was below, checking the integrity of the pilings. Sasuke was on the opposite side, a watchful shadow. The first sign was not a sound, but a smell. Not the faceless one's decay, but something sharper, cleaner, and infinitely more deadly, the crisp, metallic scent of ozone that precedes a lightning strike, mixed with the coppery tang of blood. Then, a voice, calm, melodic, and utterly devoid of warmth, drifted from the mist above them. "You have a beautiful bridge here. It would be a shame if it were painted red." A man landed on the main support beam opposite Tazuna as lightly as a leaf. He was tall, clad in simple gray garments, with bandages wrapped around the lower half of his face. His hair was a shock of silver white, and his eyes, one was a pale, ordinary gray, but the other was a milky, sightless white, scarred over. He carried no visible weapon, but the air around him hummed with a palpable, deadly intent. The mist seemed to coil away from him in reverence. Kakashi appeared in a shunshin between the man and Tazuna, his hitae pushed up, the Sharingan spinning. His usual laziness was gone, replaced by a focused intensity Naruto had never seen. Haku, Kakashi said, the name a statement and a warning. Copy Ninja Kakashi, Haku replied, bowing slightly. I have no quarrel with you. My master's business is with the bridge builder. Step aside. Can't do that, Kakashi said, his voice easy but his body a coiled spring. Then I am sorry. Haku moved. It wasn't like Naruto's red flash, a violent, thunderous rejection of physics. It was silent, fluid, and utterly precise. One moment he was on the beam, the next, he was a flicker in the mist, reappearing behind Kakashi, a glint of polished steel in his hand. Kakashi parried with a kunai, the clash of metal ringing like a bell in the muffled air. They became a blur of motion on the narrow beam, a dance of instant, lethal strikes and parries, the scent of ozone growing stronger. Naruto. Sasuke. Protect Tazuna. Sakura, get him off the bridge. Kakashi barked, his voice strained. Sasuke was already in motion, Sharingan active, tracking the impossible speeds. He flung a volley of shuriken, not at Haku, but at his potential paths, trying to hurt him. Haku didn't even seem to look, he simply wasn't where the shuriken were, his form dissolving and reforming elsewhere in the mist. Naruto's heart was a war drum. The familiar panic surged, the need for speed, for overwhelming force. He saw Tazuna's terrified face, saw Sakura trying to pull the old man towards a ladder. He saw Haku slip past Kakashi's guard, a needle-thin sunbon aimed for Tazuna's neck. No. He didn't trigger the full ignition. He remembered the beach. He remembered the containment. He pushed the fear into a single, focused point. He didn't try to cross the distance. He rejected the distance between Haku's hand and Tazuna's neck. He raised his own hand, and from his palm, he didn't release a wave of chakra. He flicked it. A concentrated needle of crimson energy, no thicker than a thread, shot across the gap. It wasn't fast enough to intercept the sunbon, but it wasn't meant to. It struck Haku's wrist. There was no explosion. Just a sharp, sizzling crack, like a live wire hitting water. Haku's hand jerked, the sunbon going wide, embedding itself in wood. He recoiled, clutching his wrist, his calm eyes widening in genuine surprise as he looked at the thin, smoking burn on his bandages. He looked at Naruto. Interesting. Then the world exploded in mirrors. With a sound like shattering ice, thousands of panes of reflective surface erupted from the mist, surrounding the entire central span of the bridge. They formed a perfect, glistening dome, the demonic mirroring ice crystals. Inside, the light became fractured, dizzying. Kakashi, Naruto, Sasuke, Sakura, Tazuna, they were reflected 1,000 times, their movements multiplied and confused. Haku stood at the center of the dome, now in a different, more formal pose. My name is Haku. My Kekei Genkai allows me to manipulate water and wind to create ice. Within these mirrors, my speed is absolute. I can move from any mirror to any other as if they were doorways. Your bridge builder will die. It is my master's will. He proved it. He stepped into one mirror and emerged from another directly behind Sasuke, a flurry of sunbon already in the air. Sasuke, with his Sharingan, was fast enough to twist away, but one needle grazed his cheek, drawing a thin line of blood. The metallic scent of it hit Naruto's nose. Panic threatened to drown him. The mirrors, the impossible speed, the trapped feeling, it was a sensory nightmare, a perfect recipe for the red flash to erupt in a catastrophic, confined explosion. He could feel it building, a pressure cooker in his chest. Don't panic. Kakashi yelled, his voice cutting through the chaos. He can only be in one place at a time. Sasuke, your Sharingan can track his true movement. Naruto, contain. Your power is a liability here. Sasuke fought like a demon, his movements becoming sharper, faster, adapting to Haku's rhythms. But Haku was a phantom, striking from impossible angles. Sunbon peppered the air, clattering against wood, forcing Sakura to shield Tazuna with her own body. Naruto stood frozen, not from fear, but from concentration. He was a raw, exposed nerve in a hall of screaming echoes. He closed his eyes. The forge. The steel. He imagined himself not as a spark, but as the anvil. He let Haku's speed, the shattering reflections, the terror of his friends, wash over him. He absorbed it. He didn't fight it. He ground it. He opened his eyes. His gaze was clear. He saw not 1,000 Hakus, but the pattern. The mirrors were a network. Haku's chakra flowed through them like blood through veins. And Naruto's crimson chakra, for all its violence, was about the violent rejection of pathways, of limits. He didn't aim at Haku. He aimed at a single mirror, 3 feet to his left. He pointed a finger. He didn't blast it. He pulsed. A tiny, compact sphere of red energy, the size of a marble, shot from his fingertip. It didn't travel in a straight line, it seemed to stutter through the air, leaving after images. It struck the mirror. The mirror didn't shatter. It unvibrated. The complex, resonant frequency of Haku's ice chakra holding the mirror together met the chaotic, entropic frequency of the crimson pulse. The mirror didn't explode outward. It dissolved inward, melting into a splash of warm water that hissed as it hit the wooden beam. Haku stumbled, emerging from a mirror nearby, his rhythm broken. He stared at the gap in his formation, then at Naruto, his single visible eye wide with shock. You disrupt the harmony. Sasuke didn't waste the opening. A fireball, hotter and more focused than any he'd managed before, roared from his mouth, not at Haku, but at the cluster of mirrors behind him. The ice sublimated into steam with a great whoosh, blinding Haku and destroying another section of the dome. The perfect prison was broken. Kakashi seized the moment. In a move too fast to follow, he was behind Haku, a kunai at his throat. It's over. Haku went still. He dropped his remaining senbon. It seems it is. There was no fear in his voice, only a quiet resignation. As the remaining ice mirrors melted away into the general fog, Naruto sank to his knees, gasping. He hadn't run. He hadn't unleashed the wildfire. He had used a single, controlled, surgical spark. A scalpel, not a sledgehammer. His body ached from the strain of containment, but it was a good ache. A forge fire ache. Sasuke stood panting, a bloody scratch on his face, looking at Naruto with something beyond rivalry, a dawning, grudging respect. Sakura hugged a sobbing Tazuna. Kakashi kept his kunai steady. Where is your master, Haku? Where is Zabuza Momochi? Before Haku could answer, a new voice, like gravel grinding under a boot, rolled across the bridge. Right here, copycat. Emerging from the mist at the end of the bridge was a monster of a man. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, his upper body bare and crisscrossed with scars. His face was wrapped in bandages, and over his shoulder he carried a cleaver-like sword wider than Naruto's torso, wrapped in filthy bandages, the Kubakirabocho, the executioner's blade. The mist seemed to congeal around him, thick with the smell of blood, swamp water, and iron. Zabuza Momochi, the demon of the hidden mist, had arrived. And his killing intent was a physical cold that made the earlier mist feel like a summer breeze. It was aimed not at Kakashi, but at the boy who had disrupted his tool's perfect technique. His single visible eye locked onto Naruto. Well, Zabuza rumbled, hefting the massive sword. Looks like there's a new little rabbit on the field. Let's see how fast you really are, Red Boy. Next. Chapter 8, The Blood-Soaked Bridge. Zabuza Momochi didn't walk onto the bridge, he manifested, the mist coiling around him like a loyal beast. The sheer presence of him was a physical weight, pressing the damp air down, flattening the sounds of the lapping water below. The metallic scent of blood that clung to him was old and deep, layered over the swampy reek of his homeland and the sharp, clean oil used on his monstrous blade. His killing intent was a different kind of cold than the faceless ones. That was a void, an absence of life. This was a glacier, slow, immense, inexorable, promising not oblivion, but brutal, shattering force. Naruto's breath hitched. The furnace in his chest roared in response to the threat, a primal challenge to a bigger predator. His muscles tensed, the ghost of speed itching in his legs. Run. Fight. Burn. Kakashi's voice cut through the rising panic, low and deadly serious. Sasuke, Sakura, get Tazuna to the far shore. Now. Naruto, with me. Do not engage Zabuza directly. Your job is to disrupt, to distract. He is out of your league. But Haku, Naruto started, glancing at the still captive boy. Is not your concern, Kakashi finished, his Sharingan fixed unblinkingly on Zabuza. Go. Sasuke, face pale but jaw set, grabbed Tazuna's arm and began pulling him backwards, Sakura covering their retreat with a kunai in her shaking hand. Haku remained motionless under Kakashi's blade, his eyes closed, awaiting his master's will or his own death. Zabuza watched the retreat with a dismissive snort. Sending the children away. Wise. They'd just be in the way. His gaze slid back to Naruto. But you're keeping the interesting one. The little red spark. Haku mentioned you. He took a single, ground-shaking step forward, the executioner's blade leaving a shallow groove in the damp wood. Let's see what you've got, kid. Show me the speed that messes with my tools. Don't, Kakashi warned, but it was too late. Zabuza moved. It wasn't Haku's silent flicker. It was a tsunami of muscle and malice. One moment he was 20 feet away, the next, the air screamed as the massive cleaver came down in a diagonal arc meant to bisect Naruto from shoulder to hip. The pressure of its passage alone felt like it would crush him. Naruto didn't think. He reacted. He didn't trigger the full red flash. He pushed a microburst of that crimson energy into his legs, not to run away, but to evade. He sidestepped with a speed that blurred his form, the edge of the blade missing him by inches and shearing through the bridge railing like it was paper. Splinters as long as his arm exploded outward. But Zabuza was already flowing into his next motion, the follow-through of his swing turning into a horizontal backhand. Naruto was still off balance. He saw the bandaged steel filling his vision, felt the deathly cold wind of its approach. Crack! Kakashi was there, intercepting the blow with a crossed pair of kunai. The sound was not of metal on metal, but of a small tree being snapped by a giant. Kakashi skidded backwards 5 feet, his boots screeching on the wood, arms trembling with the strain. I said, he growled through gritted teeth, don't engage him. He's fast. Zabuza laughed, a sound like rocks tumbling in a drum. Not fast enough, but fast. Good. This might be fun after all. He disengaged from Kakashi and lunged for Naruto again, a series of brutal, economical chops that left gouges in the bridge deck. Naruto danced back, each dodge requiring another tiny, controlled flare of red chakra in his legs. It was like walking a tightrope over a volcano. Use too little, and he'd be cleaved in two. Use too much, and he'd lose control, erupt into a full-speed panic that would likely kill everyone on the bridge, including himself. The strain was immense. He could feel the heat building in his calves, a warning burn. He was using matches to fight a forest fire. Kakashi engaged Zabuza in earnest, a whirlwind of copied techniques and desperate defense. Lightning clashed with water-style jutsu, filling the air with the smell of ozone and fresh rain. But Zabuza was a monster of close-quarters combat. His sword was an extension of his will, and he wielded it with a grace that belied its size, forcing Kakashi onto the defensive. Naruto saw an opening. As Zabuza brought his sword down in an overhead smash aimed at Kakashi, he left his side exposed for a fraction of a second. Naruto didn't hesitate. He formed a single hand seal. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. A dozen clones poofed into existence around Zabuza, not attacking, but grappling. They latched onto his arms, his legs, his sword arm, trying to slow him down, to weigh him down. It was like flies trying to halt a bull. Zabuza roared in annoyance. He shook his massive frame, and clones popped in puffs of smoke. But for a critical second, he was slowed. Kakashi seized it, driving a lightning-charged fist towards Zabuza's ribcage. Zabuza twisted, taking the blow on his shoulder instead of his heart. There was a sickening crunch and the smell of burnt flesh. He bellowed in pain and rage, and with a convulsive heave, he threw off the last of the clones. His one eye, bloodshot and insane, found Naruto. You little gnat. He abandoned Kakashi and charged, a bull with a cleaver. This was it. The killing intent was a solid wall. Naruto's control slipped. The fear, raw, animal, and total, flooded him. The furnace in his chest detonated. The world began to crawl, the colors bleeding into streaks of red. He was going to run. He was going to unleash the full, catastrophic speed and tear a path straight through Zabuza, through the bridge, through the very sky. A blur of silver and blue inserted itself between them. Haku. He moved without Kakashi's restraint, throwing himself in front of Zabuza's charge. The massive blade, meant for Naruto, didn't stop. It couldn't. With a wet, terrible thunk, it buried itself in Haku's chest, punching out through his back in a spray of crimson that painted the mist in a grotesque, beautiful arc. Time didn't slow. It stopped. Zabuza froze, his single eye wide with disbelief. The rage vanished, replaced by a shock so profound it was almost childlike. Haku? Haku coughed, a bubble of blood forming on his lips. He looked up at his master, his eyes soft. I am sorry. Master Zabuza. I have failed you. His body went limp, sliding off the blade to crumple on the deck. The smell of blood, so much sweeter and more real than the faceless one's decay, filled the air. It was a copper perfume mixed with the faint, clean scent of melting ice. Haku's Kekei Genkai was dissolving, the last of his ice mirrors dripping away into nothing. Zabuza stared at the body, then at his blood-soaked sword, then at Naruto. The killing intent returned, but it was different now. Hotter. Crazed. It was grief given an edge. You, he whispered, the word dripping with venom. You did this. You distracted me. You made him. He raised the executioner's blade again, its edge dripping with Haku's life. I'll carve your heart out and feed it to the gulls. He charged, but the charge was wild, unbalanced by agony. Kakashi, his own face a mask of grim sorrow, was there to meet him. This time, the fight was different. Zabuza was stronger, fueled by mad grief, but he was also sloppier. Kakashi was a scalpel to his meat cleaver. Naruto stood paralyzed, staring at Haku's body. The red energy had fled, leaving him cold and empty. He hadn't killed Haku. Zabuza's blade had. But he was the reason. His distraction. His presence. The spark that drew the lightning. He heard a small, choked sound. He looked over. At the edge of the bridge, where it met the shore, stood Inari. The boy had followed them. He had seen it all. He was staring at Haku's body, at the blood, at the monstrous man fighting the silver-haired shinobi. His face was not scared. It was confirmed. The world was this. Heroes died. Good people were cut down. His father's death was not an exception, it was the rule. Something broke in Naruto then. Not his control. Something deeper. The last vestige of his own childish belief in simple heroics. He looked from Inari's dead eyes to Haku's still form, to Zabuza's raging grief, to Kakashi's desperate fight. This wasn't a mission. This was a crucible. He didn't feel the urge to run anymore. He felt the urge to stand. He walked forward, past Haku's body, towards the titanic clash. He ignored Kakashi's shout to stay back. Zabuza, sensing movement, broke from Kakashi for a moment to swing a backhand blow at this gnat who had caused it all. Naruto didn't dodge.